Kindercluster. I'm originally from Wrangell, grew up mostly in Juneau, however I live in Anchorage now. Tlingit, Raven Quixote. My friends have more introduced me as the White Raven, has become my nickname now. So I really appreciate being here with everybody, and it's just been a really great learning experience. It's good to be home, and I'm going to pass it off to Ine.
Ganesh Chish, Yat Ine Bigay Dasha Jeanette, Kachini Nishland, Coach Ine Bashish Chin, Do Ashan Dashanella, Agt Denestan Nishla. Just introduce myself and my clans. I'm Navajo and Thana Atham, and I told you my clans, then in that way makes me a Dene woman. Also rooted up here now. I'm a transplant. I've been transplanted into Gwich'in territory. I've got married into Gwich'in territory and have 3 little ones that span the Athabascan nation. I don't have a cool way of saying it like Dr. EJ does. I'll figure that out later for them. Little Navajo Gwich'ins. Yeah.
Hello, I am Jessica Gerard. I live in Fairbanks, Alaska, and I am the coordinator for a grassroots coalition up there that works on climate change called the Fairbanks Climate Action Coalition, and we work within the Just Transition framework.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Polly Carr. I live in Anchorage, Alaska, have been there for just over 20 years. I'm a mother of a wonderful 7-year-old daughter, and I run the Alaska Center. We are engaging and mobilizing and electing Alaskans to stand up for clean air and water, healthy communities, and a strong democracy. And I was introduced to this framework a couple of years ago at a training with Ine and Andrea and several other Alaskans, and have just started to build it into the work that we do. So it's really exciting to be here today.
We don't really know where to stand. Can you guys help us figure out, should we sit on this couch? Oh, this is like what the view. Who out there has heard of Just Transition before, that term? Okay, few people. Okay, well, hopefully at the end of this session, everybody, including you out there in live stream world, will know what Just Transition means. And Just Transition is the framework that we're all building our people-powered movement from. And I have this that will transition. So what is Just Transition? It's not just some sexy new language. It actually comes from a long history of organizing. So we've heard a lot about the hardships, right? The history of colonization. We've heard some of where we want to be. Just transition is how do we get there? How are we going to get to where we want to be? So it is a framework for a fair shift to an economy that is ecologically sustainable, equitable, and just for all. And so key words in here, right? Economy. It's about the economy. It's about ecology. It's about sustainability. But its foundation is in just and equitability, right? So that we recognize that transition is inevitable. We are in a transitioning time. We are in a transitioning climate. We can't deny that. And if we acknowledge that there's no way for us to continue living the way that we live now because of climate change, we acknowledge that we have always, as humans, transitioned into new times, but that now we are at a particular moment that we've never seen before as humans, and our world is changing. But while that's inevitable, and transition is always, I think I heard this thing that the only thing that is, the only thing that doesn't change is that things change. Change is inevitable. But justice is not, right? We always have to work to build that justice in. Because if we're not working to build justice in from the get-go, then we're not going to be a part of shaping what comes out of the other side of this transition. And so, just transition is a strategy that was used coming out of the 90s in the lower 48 in particular. So in mid-1990s, communities, frontline communities, these are communities that are living in the communities that are being polluted, right? They're living in right next to the industries that are poisoning them. So in Southern California, the Just Transition Alliance was born, which was people from those communities who work in these industries, but were also getting poisoned by those same industries, realized they needed a strategy to move forward that would ensure that families were still getting food on the table, but were also instilling a path forward that provided dignity, and that started to protect people's health, right? Move towards protecting people's health. And so it was communities that lived, frontline, fence line communities that lived right next to power plants that started to organize with unions, with labor groups, with environmental groups, to come up with this just transition strategy that was a way of taking steps, recognizing they're not going to turn the power plant off right away. But we had to start taking steps to transition an economy, right? And so again, key things in here, economy. And that's something that we haven't really talked about, I feel like, in our 2 days yet. But we're going to start talking. That's what this session is all about. And so up here on the slide is a lot of other groups in the lower 48 who have taken that strategy and are using it in their communities, people of color, indigenous organizations. I have to shout out to Black Mesa Water Coalition, because that's a Navajo organization that built one of the first indigenous green economy policies. And then didn't wait for that green economy policy, which outlined in Navajo what a green economy is. It built a commission and built a fund, but it didn't wait then for the tribal government to even get it going. This is community organizing that happened that then built business incubators and defined for themselves what an economy is, what a traditional economy is, what a green economy is. And so then you have groups like Kentuckians for Commonwealth and other groups that are trying to scale this up. Right? So then how do we take this strategy on the local level and really build it into our larger cities or our state? How do we scale it up? And that's where we're getting into now.
So we wanted to unpack a few words as we get started here. And we can click that. Is it this one? Okay, so the word economy we really wanted to unpack, and looking at the Greek roots of this, eco means home, and if you can click that again. And so economy is actually the management of home. And I know that when I broke this down for myself, it was actually really rejuvenating to see it that way, because we think of economy as like the GDP, transactions, how much money and dollars people have, and that's what economy is. And yet this definition, when we truly look at it, is really just how are we taking care of the place where we live and the people where we live. And that's a very refreshing way to understand it. And so we had one question that I wanted to popcorn out to the group, which was just, what ways do you think that you can measure a healthy economy looking at this definition? What are some of the things that we might measure? Shout them out. Think about your home. A car? Okay. Think about how you're living. Leisure time? Health. Great. Hunting and fishing. Vacation. Rest. Yes. So thinking about those ways that we can have a positive, healthy economy is where we wanted to start. And so as we go into the next conversation, we really want to talk about having a visionary economy. So leaving those other definitions behind that I just mentioned and thinking about what is a visionary way to take care of our homes. So we feel like the definition we're living in is we're in this box, right? We have this system of economy that we've all been taught, and we want to blow it up. And we want to stuff it down. Sorry, we wanted to blow it up, but our word art didn't quite get us there. So instead, we're just going to push it down. So, it's a really different economy from what we have right now. This is an economy that incorporates strategies that democratize, decentralize, and diversify our activity. This is about, moving from a dirty energy economy to energy democracy, from an industrial food system to food sovereignty, from destructive development to ecological restoration. These are some of those examples of the economy that we would like to make. And the transition to a visionary economy is all about navigating some contradictions that we're dealing with. And in order to move to that visionary economy, we need a really clear vision. We need to have a moral compass and endurance, and we want to pursue that with fierce love.
So we keep talking about the word economy, but what holds up an economy? And so really quickly, we're just going to run through the pillars of an economy, and then we'll talk about where we are now and where we're hoping to go in this just transition. So an economy is built on resources plus work for a purpose. Does this make sense to everybody? Generally, we can agree that that's what we do in an economy. Okay, and it's held together by a worldview that is told to us, what we all agree on essentially or not, and then it's enforced by a governance structure. Does this make sense to everybody? Or we can agree on it for now? All right, so currently, and I'm going to stand up for this part because I just want to see that whole thing. Currently, the way that we talk about this is right now we're living in an extractive economy. And Ine mentioned that hasn't really been discussed in the last 2 days, and so we really just want to put this out there, that right now we live in an extractive economy. So what's the purpose of this economy? Can you? It is the enclosure of power and wealth. So the 1%, right? Our economy is putting a lot of resources into holding up a very few amount of people. And the resources in that economy, some are extracted, we dig, we burn, we dump. And I know here we have fish, we have caribou, we have moose, and that is not necessarily fitting in this platform, but by and large, our economy in Alaska is a big dig, burn, dump economy. And with that, we have work. So is our work just right now? Is it fair to people? People get good wages? Is it equitable? Is it healthy? And I think a lot of us in the last few days can agree that no, that it's an exploitation of labor and is held together by a worldview. Don't pull it yet, but I just want to popcorn who here can name some things that haven't seen this framework before of what you would call the worldview of quote unquote America today? Capitalism. What else? Yeah. Yes. Healthcare? Military. What else? Patriarchy. Pharmaceuticals. White supremacy. All right, so our worldview in this model is a worldview where we have consumerism, which we could call capitalism, white supremacy, individualism, and patriarchy. So we're just going to call it what it is. We're going to name it. These are the things that our worldview is holding us together right now. And how do we keep that control? How do we keep this going? Somebody mentioned it earlier, but how do we keep this together? All right.
Just keep doing what we're doing.
Oh, spinning the wheel. Militarism, right? We see it all of the time. We saw it at Standing Rock. We see it when we go to Iraq for oil and gas. We hold this whole worldview together by power. So, we have the extractive economy. Does everyone agree here that we want to leave this economy? That this is not great for any one of us? This is not great for our communities, our people, our health? So if that's where we are, we want to talk about where we're going. And so I just want to pass this over to Ine now. Oh, no, sorry, Kendra.
So now that we got a little bit of base here, I wanted to talk about where we're going to go. And this is where I want to indigenize it. And how do we put our values and recognize we're on native land and really put this in toward our transition and where we want to go. So, yep, we're good. Mother Earth, our renewing gifts. So if we're looking at our last slide and comparing our resources here, here's what we want to look at. We want to look at our earth, our renewing, what does the earth give us? It's land and water, and how do we use those resources, and how do we harness those resources? Rather than the extractive economy, we can look at some of the things that we can do with the resources that we have without really harming the communities that we are living in. We can look at sun, we can look at the water, and how do we harness that energy, and really looking at the gifts that we've been given. And that, with what we were saying was labor, really what we want to talk about more is kinship and cooperation. It's something that we're passionate about. It's not just a job that you go to. It's something that I'm passionate about, that you want to put your whole heart into, and we cooperate with each other. And we're not really divorcing our values from our work, but we're really putting it into it. So we have our earth, our gifts, in with cooperation, which really gets us to our community and our survival. And we talk about the generations that are going forward, as we talked about the next 10,000 years. This is what we want to do. We want to work together to make sure that we're building a community that can survive through the generations and for the next 10,000 years. And as we talk about what holds us all together, so I'm going to put that question out there. What's going to hold us all together in order to make that happen? And some of the things that we value and that we have talked about here today. So I'm going to put that question out there. So I'll kind of answer it for you. And and really what we're looking at is our culture and our language and these indigenous values that we have. And we want to use that as really holding us all together. And then that comes in with our full circle of our traditional government and our tribal government, our community responsibility. So if we're looking forward and how we want to proceed into the future, I feel like that this is the economy, this is the transition we want to look to. We want to put it in, and as I say, we want to indigenize it. Recognize we're on native land, and this is some of the things that we can use going forward.
Thanks, ladies. I feel like we should be the view here, but okay, so I feel like we got a really good understanding of kind of where we're at. We got a good collective understanding of where, unfortunately, our economy is now. And we have a clear vision of where we want to go. But how do we get there? And how do we get there and ensure that we're not just building this beautiful vision and its underpinning and foundation is still rooted in the unjust colonial practices that, we've got to do this very consciously, right? And that gets us to, okay, we know where we are. Sorry, I wasn't doing the things. Extractive economy. We want to get to this indigenized economy. And so we've got some just transition strategies in there. We've got to be stopping the bad, right? We've got to be oppositional to the things that are harming us. And then the other side of that, we've got to be building the new. We've got to be, and maybe it's not new, it's reclaiming that place-based knowledge. You guys, many of these strategies are happening, right, in this room. Stopping the bad, building the new. We also, though, have to be divesting from extractive power, right? We have to be starving and starving that power of its resource, of its monetary resource there. And we have to start investing in our power. And of course, there has to be a values filter on that. We've got to think critically about where we're putting our money. And we've got to change the rules. We've got to think about our governance structures and start bringing that governance, flipping the power, getting power back to our local governments, our tribal governments. And whoa, then there's this big handout. So a lot of this handout was made by Movement Generation. It's a group that's based in California. It's a really great little diagram, and we will email it to you if you would like. But it's a great model that kind of represents where we're at, where we want to go, the transition pieces. And we're all working at actually trying to just Alaskanize that and bring it home here. So we're open to all sorts of support in helping to Alaskanize it as well. But this framework has been helpful for us to get our bases in alignment, right? Sometimes we think we're all on the same page, and then we realize we're not, and we're like halfway down a path together. So this has been helpful for us to bring folks that maybe they're, from different experiences or different parts of our community and just kind of get on the same page. And we're going to go through then what each of those strategies is.
So I'm going to speak to this first one here, which is stopping the bad. And I'm going to stand up for a second. This, to me, is a place where I feel like a lot of us live, that reacting to the threats, right? The extractive threats to our cultures and our communities. And so I just wanted to ask everybody for a moment, stand up if you think that you are in that space in your work where you are working on stopping the bad. And it's not everybody. Thank you. You may sit down. Thank you. It's not everybody, but I think that as people who are advocating for social justice, we often find ourselves in that place because there are many threats that we have to be fighting against. And I'm just going to highlight a few here that I think people are familiar with in Alaska. Things like stopping the proposed Pebble mine from impacting the fishery that people rely upon in Bristol Bay, or protecting the Arctic refuge from oil development in the calving grounds of the porcupine caribou herd, or advocating against the senseless gun violence that is happening in our schools and our communities and with communities of color. These are things we are fighting against. And of course, constantly trying to remind people and fighting against the perpetual violence against Indigenous women, which of course is connected to the violation of our lands and the violence against our lands. So these are the things that we find ourselves fighting against. And I want to just say that as we are talking about a just transition, it is important that we are still in the space of fighting the bad, because it is very much holding the line. We can't advance to that place that we want to be if we can't hold the line on the things that are threatening the way of life and the values that we want to be living with. And right now, the economy that we are living in is in direct contradiction to the values that we've been talking about during this whole summit. So fighting the bad, stopping the bad is holding the line. But we can't just hold the line. And I'm going to hand it to Jess, who's going to talk about other strategies.
So we can't just hold the line with stopping the bad. We have to be creating the new at the same time, right? And I think one of the things that is always really inspiring is when you get back on the land and people are remembering their languages and reclaiming those, and food harvesting and things of that nature. So these are just some examples of things that are happening across Alaska where we are building the new. And when we talk about building the new, it's also this notion of reclaiming, right? It's not everything new. A lot of it is things that have been going on for 10,000 years, 20,000 years. So harvesting potatoes. In Kotzebue, they're a really great green garden that's happening. And that is an old and new technology together. So it's also putting the heart into what we want to see in the future. We can't just put all of our energy into the bad. Whoop, what's happening? So there wasn't another photo in there? Well, I did put something in here too that is not showing up, but that's okay. I'm going to describe it. So we had a slide in here that was done by a group called Alaska Rising Tide, and they went into an AFN gathering, and they did a banner drop, essentially, that said, "No Alaska LNG." And I say that specifically because that is a place where we are talking about stopping the bad and building the new, but it sometimes has to be oppositional. It's a very sticky conversation with LNG, especially where we live in Fairbanks. But to really have that visionary plan that we can't just keep doing these little things, that we have to have a big vision forward, especially with the climate crisis hitting us so hard in Alaska right now and in the north. So I just wanted to highlight that we do have to be oppositional sometimes in this transition.
Changing the rules. This is actually one of my favorite parts to talk about because this is an area that I've been involved in for a while, and one of the reasons I took a new job and moved over to Native Peoples Action, because where we're at right now in our government structures is not taking into account our cultural ways of life. We're having to really fight to get there and to make sure we have recognition. We see some of the photos, of course, of the strides that we've made of recognizing our indigenous language, but we have so much further to go. We need to make sure that in the policies that are being discussed, that they're going to the tribes and the individuals and the people of the land to ask them to work with them on the change that need to be made, rather than governments making changes, coming to us and saying, this is how it's going to be, now you're going to have to live with it. These changes can impact our way of life, impact our fish and our hunting. So how do we do this, and how do we change the rules? Well, some of the things that we can look at going forward: we need more Alaska Native people that are running for office. We need to see more diverse and really representing our culture all the way from the bottom. We're talking community councils, our assembly, our legislature. So we are at the table, and we are being consulted. And so when these policies are coming forward, we can say, no, we're going to work with our communities. We're going to start doing more compacts with our tribal governments. And how do we do this? We need more people to run for office. We need to get out and we need to vote. And we need to begin changing these policies. We need to start making sure that when we are crafting the policies, the indigenous people are at the table from the very beginning, and we are crafting it going forward. So this is a real passion of mine, where I want to see these changes happen. I actually spent many years in the legislature, and part of my frustration there was watching and really hearing some of the comments and really not recognizing that we're on Native land, and And just even trying to get some of those basic concepts through to people that, yeah, I get you're in an urban center, but you're on native land, and you're making choices for people all across the state, and not just the urban centers, not just Anchorage where you might be from. So this is where we can start changing those ideas and start changing our policies of starting and working with our tribes and working with our native people. So again, I'm just going to say we need to get out and vote. We need to change the people that are making those decisions. We need to be making those decisions, and we need to have native people there at the table and being there from the very beginning.
And we need to change those laws, right? Like, there was a picture of voting for Prop 1. We need to vote. We need to get out there and vote on these propositions that are going to matter, too. Who is doing this?
So we need to move the resources. And a lot of this is we're talking about economy. We're talking about specific examples of moving the resources of money. And so if you go back one slide, though, so we had a campaign that said divest from oil. And so a big part of that is that Wells Fargo, right, was funding the pipeline that was going through Standing Rock. And so we had a campaign that was in solidarity with Standing Rock, but also within the notion of these big corporate banks that are funding the continued pollution and colonization of our lands and waters. And so in Alaska, there's been a local campaign to divest our Alaska Permanent Fund from oil and gas. And I'll just read this quote. It says, "The $65 billion Alaska Permanent Fund has drastically reduced their investments in fossil fuel companies. Investments in fossil fuel companies have dropped precipitously from over $3 billion or more than 7.5% in 2011 to less than 1.7 billion, or less than 2.8. That's a lot of words. Basically, people aren't investing in oil and gas anymore, right? That people are investing in the future, realizing the impacts, the real science-based impacts of oil and gas, and divesting from that. But that's not it, right? We can't just move money and then where does it go? We have to reinvest. And so reinvest in local banks, in local small businesses that are selling their crafts and reinvigorating those trade systems. We also have to invest in language, and spending the money with this AO that was just signed at the Warming of the Hands event is also a really good place to, now we have to invest in that, right? We have to invest in getting language in schools, in communities, and we have to put our money where our mouth is. Am I doing this? Oh, so in summation, we have to move the resources, we have to change the rules, and we have to build the new. And all of that comes together with different pieces. And so the different pieces of this, we all are in different pieces. Only some of us stood up for fighting the bad, but I really feel like the people that have been in this space during this summit are building the new, are really committing to this new way of being. And so it's not only one or the other, it's doing all three simultaneously, and also supporting each other in that work, which Ine is going to talk a little bit about.
Yeah. So if we're all doing this, if we all know what the real solutions are, right, what we want, and we know what the false solutions are, those ones that maybe somebody's trying to push upon us, but we know they're not what we want. How are we doing this together? And that's where this framework has really helped us to build collaboration, right? We have to recognize also what's politically realistic. But why is politically realistic there in this drawing? A dotted line. That's a real question. That's a question. Who's awake? Because you can change it. Because you can change it, right? What is politically realistic changes. We make that change. People power makes that change. And so we need to be pulling that politically realistic over into our green space. What we know is what we know are the solutions. Otherwise, we know that what politically, if our current president right now doesn't show us that what is politically realistic is malleable, I don't know what else does. Nobody thought he had a chance. That changed like that. So we have to be working even more aggressively to pull that dotted line over to our green circle, right? And we need strategies that address each one of those circles, right? We need strategies that are creative, that they might not be politically realistic right now. Maybe they're community building in this like beautiful way that nobody thinks is going to be realistic right now. But they're building the solutions that we want to live into, and we have to be supportive of that, right? We want those to be there so that when we get this politically realistic line over, those solutions are already being practiced, being carried out. But we need solutions that also not just work in what's politically realistic, but codify what we've created, what those politically realistic solutions are. That means we're taking those things further. We're not just stopping with the fact that Alaska Native languages are officially recognized. Now we're actually implementing that and implementing it further, because we know that if we're not continuously practicing and implementing, those things can get taken away instantly. We also need strategies that get people into governing, right? That expand from within what's politically realistic, but maybe not within, but maybe like over to the green. And we need strategies that are in direct opposition to what's bad. The solutions that we don't want, false solutions. And then maybe there's some false solutions over there that don't seem too politically realistic and nobody's paying attention, but they're just not going to be that realistic. We need people to be exposing that, because if we're not exposing that, then all of a sudden that politically realistic gets over there. We're all going to be like, dang it, who's doing that? So we can recognize that there's a spectrum of organizations probably at this summit, definitely within Alaska, that are carrying out strategies within each of these realms. And often we like get all judgy about each other, you know, like, oh, they're way left field, they're way too politically realistic. And I think what we really need to get to is a place of understanding that, hey, we see these three circles, we recognize where we're doing work right now, but we're all working towards the same vision, right? And getting clear on that same vision is what's really important for us to be moving forward in trust. And all of those things help us change the story, right? Change the story of what's possible here in Alaska. And all of this work we hold with some guiding principles that just help us to check in and make sure that we're still doing our work in the most strategic and loving way.
So some guiding principles, and one thing I'll say about these is they are for us to carry. They're for us to carry in our hearts when we do this work. Maybe you're not going to walk into the Chamber of Commerce and share these principles, right? But they are for us to carry and to give us some hope and to give us some energy and to give us some grounding. So the first guiding principle is what the hands do, the heart learns. And that really is, we can't just be fists up all the time, right? We can't just be in defense all the time. We have to be out there practicing love, self-care. We have to pick, we have to walk, we have to hunt, we have to swim, whatever it is that looks like for you. We have to play, we have to laugh. FAI's agreement about humor, right? We have to be in the place where we still want to do this.
If it's the right thing to do, we have every right to do it. So we have the right to clean air and clean water. We have the right to self-determination. We have the right to our languages and our culture and our traditions. We have every right to do what we need to do to protect them, whether it's having to get rid of the bad, stop the bad with our protests, or if it's changing the policies or whatever we need to do. So again, if it's the right thing to do, We have every right to do it.
Can I mention something on this one? Today seems like a really great day to also point at this. If it's the right thing to do, we have every right to do it, because today a group of Alaska Native people were arrested in Washington, D.C. this morning. And these were, they broke the rules, they broke the law, and they were arrested to oppose Kavanaugh and his appointment to the Supreme Court. And they were the first to carry that message in that way as Indigenous peoples and the threat that Kavanaugh imposes. So just another example of breaking the law because it needs to be done.
So I have the next one here. It's about governance. Waiting. If we are not prepared to govern, we are not prepared to win. So this is about several things. This is about making sure that our tribal governments are seen as sovereign nations. This is about electing people into positions that truly represent the communities that they serve. This is about making sure that all Alaskans have access to the decisions that are impacting our resources and our communities. So shifting that closed, sort of centralized power and distributing it across to the people and building more collective power. I think it's also an example with ballot measure 1 of people saying the law as it is and the threats that we're fighting day in and day out with these large-scale extractive projects, it's not the way we want to live anymore. We want to change the law. We want to create a solution because we can. And that is the practice of saying, no, Alaskans can put our salmon future into our own hands. So we have the ability to govern. We need to do it, and we need to step up to it.
Yeah. And our last little guiding principle, if it's not soulful, it's not strategic. Okay? Like, I always see power, right? We don't have a whole lot of power, right, as community organizations. Well, there's different kinds of power, right? There's economic power, there's military power. We don't necessarily have the military power, but what we do have is a people power. And if we're going to be successful in mobilizing people power, because we're all in social justice, we're generally up against some, what's that, David and Goliath? We're generally up against some big beans. And if we're going to be bringing more people into this and building our people power, we've got to be soulful. We've got to come in with our passion. Otherwise, it's not strategic. So that is that principle. So that's kind of how we see foraging through a diverse multi-sector movement, because it really is going to take multi-sectors to come together, take all our fish, all of the good work that's happening out there. If we're not coordinated, if we're not all in the same we don't trust each other, that we're going in the same direction, then we can't get to this. And this is where we want to be, right? We want to be organized to be bigger than the colonizers, bigger than those powers that have been oppressing, right? So that is our just transition framework, and there is a whole lot that could be said in actual tangibles and actual implementation of economic plans that are outside of the box, right? That are really thinking about how we indigenize our economy. But we just wanted to share a bit of this framework that we've been organizing from, like I said, a very diverse base of folks coming together with the same vision. And I don't know how much time we have, but if we have time, we could take questions, right? Nobody's telling us to stop. Colin's not going to stop us. Are there questions? Yeah.
I was just watching a seminar from a past Alaska, not necessarily social justice, but an awareness. And one of the elders had talked about was our relationship with our resources. And that word resources was really a derogatory word towards the way the indigenous people think or feel about their land that they are occupying in or that they live in. And one of the things that she had said is our ancestors a long time ago said we were all equal. Everything had a spirit. Everyone had a feeling. Everyone had all the same things. But when we got colonized, we called these, our brothers and sisters, the trees and so forth, we called them resources. And we lowered that, that standard that all things are equal. And so, I had a lot of different mixed emotions in that word as resource, because as we're reclaiming things in our lives as Indigenous people, I remember Marsha Hotch was saying that we were, as Tlingit people, we were resource managers. We cared for the land, we cared for the streams and so forth, so we didn't over-abuse them by taking too much and so forth. So then I was like thinking about that too as well, So again, it's just about changing our ways, reclaiming those indigenous beliefs and so forth, and not colonizing ourselves in that direction. I'm not sure if I'm really explaining it correctly, but now that I look at when I'm looking out at the trees, I don't want to think of them as a resource. When I look at the rivers and the streams, I don't want to see it as a resource. I want it to be like a way of living and so forth. So again, Gunachish, for your presentation, you brought a lot to my mind in regards to what just transition is, because again, it's something new. It's something that's generating, that's becoming bigger. So again, Gunachish for your hard work.
Oh, Gunachish. And you're right, exactly right? I mean, this extractive economy that we're in is brought by a colonial system. And a colonial system whose efforts whose goal is, right, to dominate land, resources, people. So that word resource really is that dominion, right? It puts people in this place of dominion over everything. They're no longer our relatives and kinship in that way. It's now, that's a name that's below us, right? So when we're going into what is our indigenized economy, we changed that to Mother Earth's gifts, right? To generalize pan-native, but in general, we all realize that Mother Earth gives us those gifts, right? And we have to use some of those gifts, but we have to use them in a way that gives back to her as well, right? Thank you. Are there other comments?
I'm third generation Alaskan. I work for the pipeline, and I don't like anything you have to sit. No, I'll just play. I've heard Just Transition for about a little over a year now, and it's so good to hear y'all talking about this on the stage. I really appreciate it. You guys did amazing. When I first heard about Just Transition, I was a little confused. But now that I see it I'm starting to get it. And I just wanted to share a little tip with y'all. If you guys want to begin today, just start buying local. Just start buying with the people you know. But go to little mom and pop shops. Stop going to Walmart as much. And these big corporations are part of this whole capitalistic regime. and they buy out all the small little businesses that the people that you would know that would own these businesses. They buy them out and they push them out, and that's how capitalism works. So that's one thing, that I really see can happen in Alaska because we're so small. The economies, we know who sells things. We know who's running these little, who, like say for Christmas, don't go to Zales. Find your local native artist and be like, hey, I'm gonna treat you like my new Zales. I'm gonna give you that same value. That right there is part of the just transition. And another thing is self-sacrifice. We are in a state that gets dividends every year. I think, here in the next few years, we're going to have to start doing that self-sacrifice where we divest, where we start refocusing and focusing our money towards clean energy and stuff like that. So, see where your money is coming from and redirect it to something good, something self-sustainable. But I just want to say thank you. You guys did amazing up there. Thank you.
I just wanted to respond to Samuel's comments about the buying local, because I think that when people started raising alarms about the recession and oil prices going down, there was a very small sort of dialogue elevating about like buy local, and I think that it's something that comes up during the holidays, but it's something that we need to turn into a permanent practice, because it's not just buying local and developing the relationships with the people in your community, right, who are providing goods and services, but it's keeping that currency in Alaska, whereas so much of what we are as Alaska is taken out of Alaska. All the benefits are taken out of Alaska, and this is a way that we can be practicing that in our daily lives. And it's harder when you are in a place where you might have the pressures of needing to order, right, like remote and online. And so I think that's a question and a challenge we need to grapple with as Alaskans, but where we can do it, I think it's exactly like an excellent first step.
And I just wanted to add a little bit onto that. In the community that I'm in East Anchorage, one of the things that we saw that has been successful in other communities was a farmer's market. And so we got together and we formed our own board, and now we have a farmer's market every Saturday, and we start bringing vendors in and crafts. And so this is a place now we have, and we've not only built our community there, and it's a really centralized into a new park that we put together and really worked with our community to do that, but built this farmer's market where now every year we have more and more people, and honestly, that's where I do my Christmas shopping, as I start getting all the gifts from the local people, because it's keeping it within our communities, and I know it's helping people out throughout there. But another part I just kind of wanted to mention that I didn't want to let go was when you brought up corporations too, and that's another thing when you think about making change and policy changes. We have large corporations that the state essentially is giving money to them. We have the tax credit system where we're giving millions of dollars back to corporations for them to extract our resources. What could we be doing with those millions of dollars? We could be improving our education system. We could be having much better public safety in our rural areas. We need to be looking at these policies and making sure that we're getting those things changed. We don't need to be continuing to give multi-billion-dollar companies millions of dollars of state money. We have much better ways to use those resources. We need more public safety. We need better education systems. We need to make sure that we are investing in those. And so I think that that's another way that we can look at that and thinking local and looking at not just corporations, but looking at divesting some of those funds. So I just couldn't let that opportunity go without saying that.
I just want to note that I think some people hear this and they're like, farmers markets, but we have big oil and that's lots of money and it built everything. And Just Transition recognizes, this framework recognizes, we recognize that this is not going to be the oil boom that Alaska has faced, right, or has seen. It is not going to be all this money for everybody all the time. What it is going to be a reinvigoration of values and a transition of values to things that aren't just money-based. And so when we're talking about this, it's more of uplifting the caring economy, the subsistence economy, the things that exist that are gonna allow for the regeneration of Mother Earth. So we recognize that, and I just wanna name that as we go on this conversation.
And I'll add on to that. This quote from Winona LaDuke. She says, when you live in an over-consuming society, it requires constant intervention into other people's territory. When you live in an over-consuming society, it requires constant intervention into other people's territory. And it is the indigenous people's territories that is constantly being taken from, right? And so we see the porcupine caribou herd being threatened now. We see the communities on the north slope of Nuuksuk where they have 70% of the population is on medicine to breathe. You know, these are the things that it's continuing to harm because of overconsumption, right? And so I think part of just transition, like Jessica said, is not going to be a boom of resource, of money. Right? It's partly recognizing that we have to conserve resources. We have to shift our way of thinking. We have to recreate. We have to re-indigenize all of our systems. And so, and I just want to take a moment to tell you about one of those. So a project that I was able to be a part of, that I helped start in Arizona, our communities on the Navajo reservation still do a lot of sheep herding. Right, that's a traditional economy. We still shear sheep and take that wool to buyers. They take it to buyers off the reservation who give them $5 for a truckload of wool. One of the projects that we did with small business incubators and working with communities was doing some research and realizing that most of the wool in this country is imported from New Zealand. So we connected with green carpet companies and these kind of things and brought the buyers to our people, did projects within our communities to do value-added techniques to bring up the quality of our wool for those buyers. And so we started, in one community, the first year, filled one semi full of wool that connected the buyers to the suppliers, that brought direct, like 200% increase in funding directly to those communities. This past summer was the 5th year of doing it. We had 5 semi-trucks full from 5 different communities, all going back into those communities, those traditional communities, cooperative owned. And these are traditional economy, not just trying to recreate a capitalist system based on our traditional economy, but really how do we take that traditional economy and use the best of modern marketing tools and combine and recreate and create something else. Create a whole different wheel, right? Maybe it's not even a wheel. I don't know what it is, but these are ideas of that, thinking outside the box and what we hope Just Transition can do, and really what has to be very local, right? Because what works in Juneau is not going to work in Fairbanks in terms of localized economies, right? Any other questions?
Oh, wait, you got one in the corner.
Daniel. Hey, thank you for doing this training. I've seen it before and I learn from it every time. And I think one of the things that I appreciate about it is that there's so much work right now and so many fires and so many emergencies, and none of us can do it alone. And I think this framework helps to give us all a place in the larger vision, and a way that we can link arms and make concrete movements in the right direction and start to turn the cycle around away from oppression and violence and trauma and as we lessen that, start to, send resources that way. And I know it's kind of it's kind of academic, and we've been so immersed in wonderful stories this whole time, and it's kind of a little bit of a gear shift to make it like, it's kind of a little bit more analytical, but it's actionable, and so thank you for sharing.
So on that note of actionable, I want to either popcorn if people are feeling like it, or maybe talk amongst your tables, but what do you feel like your community or other examples in Alaska that you've heard about working on, whether it's community gardens or revitalization of language, like what in your community fits into this model? We want to hear about, a lot of what our work is to hear about what other Alaskans are doing, and I really appreciated the feedback about the title resources to really make this an Alaskanized framework. So I want to hear from y'all, like, what is Alaska doing all across the state that fits into this framework? Do people want to share out loud right now? Does anybody like have a burning one? They're like, yes, I can't wait to share this. Okay, great.
Well, I work for Gold Belt Heritage Foundation, and I work with families. And so one of the, I think one of the cool things that I'm doing is we started up a community garden behind the Tlingit and Haida Community Center on Hospital Drive. And, when I first started it, I thought of it as a wellness, just to get our families together, show them that, we can grow our own vegetables and so forth. And then I started networking with UAF, Cooperative Extensions, and realized that they had this plethora of stuff that I could do with families in regards to harvesting, preserving, homesteading, making soups and so forth. But then I was like, my major goal is to just be able to do healthy activities with the families, incorporating the Tlingit language, also putting in the cultural stories to relate with what we're harvesting. And so, as I watched this, I'm thinking, wow, this could even be bigger than that. Because not only will I be, not only do I share the harvesting and preserving of our traditional foods, because I don't want us to lose our rights to be able to go out and harvest blueberries. Like we have the lower 48 who has to get a permit to go harvest blueberries. I know that they imposed that on us here in Alaska, but Alaska said, hey, no way, we're not going to, we don't need to have that law. And so I'm very excited about this community garden and the connection that it has allowed me to network with our other tribal agencies, like our health consortium, also with our tribal community here in Juneau, but also to be a prototype for our other villages like Angoon, Huna, Cake, and so forth. These guys already have community gardens, but it could be even bigger in that essence of the farmers market, traditional arts, and so forth. So again, I'm real excited about this movement. And I think that as it grows, that our people, not only the indigenous nations, will be learning about these diverse ways of utilizing, I hate to say that word, resources, but to do it in a good way. Like when we harvest, that we believe all things have a spirit, that as we're harvesting it, we're going to do it with good feelings, good intentions, just like as we start our morning here every morning, we want to start it with good intentions. And I love what Tommy Jimmy Jr. would always share in regards to when we harvest, that when we're harvesting, that we're going to keep a promise to the foods, the things that we harvest, that it's going to be something that we will nourish our bodies with, that we will make someone happy with because of those good feelings and as we're preserving our foods. So again, I'm very excited about that, and thank you for allowing me to share this one big, great thing that's happening in our community.
Other folks want to share anything? Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, Kyle.
My name is Jenn Brown. I'm also working with Gold Belt Heritage. A few years back, I lived down there in Maui, Maliko Gulch, and I was a part of the lawful Hawaiian government. It's a sovereignty for the Hawaiian nation. And I was fortunate to be a part of their first farmers market. And within that change of how the community was stepping up, and by working at a farmer's market and working there, in a gulch and being accepted to basically lumber and rest on that land, we'd go to the landfill, and I watched a positive change that I think could really influence the world. And it's just a simple plastic ban. And if you recognize this as a tote bag, and by bringing this really wherever, I could bring extra food home, etc. And they had these big fences due to the trade winds that would catch the debris. And a majority of it was plastic bags flying off into the fences. And throughout the years returning back seasonally, I had the chance to witness with my own eyes that the plastic bags phased out. They were no longer getting debris on those fences. And if they could do it, we can do it. And their, relations to us, And so I think the farmers market is something we could believe in with our subsistence and the sharing of our gatherings, and being able to contribute that in not a commercialization point, but just a nurturing point, that we could be much better off due to less preservatives, etc. So, Chish.
So I think we're probably getting close to time, and I'm going to hand this back to Ine to talk about some next steps that we're working with and want to invite you in on.
Yeah, we are a number of our organizations. So I'm the director of an organization called Native Movement, and Kendra is the director of an organization called Native People's Action. And Polly is the director of an organization called Alaska Center. Some of you might have heard of it before. And Jessica is a coordinator of a group called Fairbanks Climate Action Coalition, but we also work with the First Alaskans Institute and the Gwich'in Steering Committee, and I think there's a few other groups that we've started to talk about how can we do a statewide Just Transition Summit and really bring in the various sectors of our community that need to be at the table to talk about what a statewide transitional economy could look like, right? That means including labor, including education. How are we building training centers? How are we going to be building education programs that train for a totally different economy, right? The folks are doing it all over the lower 48 already. IBEW is at the forefront of building new training programs to train their workforce into new tech economies that are around solar, around energy efficiency and electric vehicles. We need to be doing that in this state, otherwise we're going to be left behind. We already see that we're in a hole because of our pretty sole dependence economically on oil and gas. In addition, we're feeling the climate impacts, right? So we have this critical moment to to look at this as an opportunity for shaping something different. And if we're not going to get involved in shaping something different, then the folks in charge are going to continue to do the same thing that they've been doing for the past 30, 40 years, right? It's the same old economic strategy. And we need to be bringing more folks to the table. So sometime in this next year, we're trying to host an Alaska statewide Just Transition Summit that can bring all the sectors of our community together, talking about, well, what is it really going to take to start putting in place some of the transitional steps that we need to that need to happen. We recognize it's not going to happen overnight, but it's not going to happen at all if we don't start making those steps. So if you're interested in being a part of that summit, we definitely welcome you. A lot of us, we're working on very limited budgets, and that's okay, but we need that people power. So come up after this, give us your contact information. We definitely want to work together to figure out how we can bring more folks into the fold of this just transition framework and really start pushing and being the leaders in what is a new breaking the box economy for Alaska. Yeah? Yep. Any other last words? Nope. Okay. Well, thanks.